Well, good evening to all of you. I guess 5 o'clock we can call evening, quitting time. I'm just starting. I hope you've had a good day. And I hope I have something for you today that will be interesting and encouraging, especially as we're living in times that even though right now it looks like things have gotten a little bit better, we're still in the end time, and we need to keep our eyes focused on what is right and good. So, for those of us who only read English, not Hebrew and Greek, we're in a bit of a pickle in terms of the Bible. Because you know, Isaiah, Moses, Daniel, Paul, John, Mark, all those guys, they didn't write in English. They wrote in Hebrew or Greek. And so the Bible, Old and New Testaments, have come down to us in languages not our own, and we have to read it in translation. But think about this. A native speaker of a written language easily picks up nuances from a story or a poem or an article, yet a non-native speaker of the language will be utterly baffled by some of the things they read. We've grown up using idioms that befuddle non-English speakers. Like what I said when I opened this Bible study about being in a pickle. What does that mean? Dill, sweet, butter, whatever. What does that mean to be in a pickle? I've never been in a pickle in my life. There's not ever been a pickle that's been big enough to get in. The things like outside it's raining cats and dogs. Go, get under cover. What kind of beast is going to come out of the air? What's this one? Oh, how about egging a person on? What does that mean? Scrambling them? They like fried, or I don't know. And how about pull the wool over somebody's eyes? What does that mean? I mean, maybe if you're a non-native speaker, you can figure it out. But just seeing them, on a page, what is he trying to say? And we know, generally, what strange words like befuddle and bunkum and pulchritude mean. Maybe you don't know what pulchritude means, but, we can usually kind of figure it out. By the way, pulchritude means beauty. I call it the ugliest word for beauty that ever was. And with just a high school education, we can recognize such things as assonance and alliteration and certain figures of speech. That's what our 11th and 12th grade English teachers tried to teach us way back when. So with a little experience, we can easily spot how a writer organizes his points, or we can pick out his emphases with little trouble. Now try doing this with Hebrew and Greek. You're suddenly given a page of Greek text or Hebrew text, and it just looks like Greek to you, right? It looks like gibberish because both languages use their own alphabets. They don't use the wonderful alphabet that we have. I mean, they're both probably precursors of ours, but you have to learn the actual symbols that match to certain sounds before you can even begin to read either Hebrew or Greek. And then you look at Hebrew more closely and you find out the Hebrew doesn't even use vowels. They just give you a page full of consonants. And you're supposed to figure that out. And early on, they didn't even have spaces between words or sentences. It was just, how could they? And Hebrew is especially strange because it's a Semitic language, and it organizes its vocabulary in triads. I don't know if you are aware of this. I talked about it in a sermon several years ago. But that's three-letter combinations of things. And when you add a vowel here or a different vowel there, add a prefix or add a suffix, the idea changes its meaning just enough to make it a different idea, a different word. So like the words Adam and Edom both have the same triad, but they're different. They don't mean the same thing. But both have the base meaning of red, the color. One's a red man, or the other one's red dirt or something. So it's a concept that we don't have in English. English is a weird language because it's made up of Old English or Anglo-Saxon, a Germanic language, a lot of French, and a heavy influence of French's precursor, Latin. And so we have usually more than 2 words for everything, sometimes 3, and they've, over the many centuries, come to mean different things. And it's confusing to non-native speakers because not only do we have those 3 languages making up our own, we borrow words from all over, and there's the confusion with English as a second language courses. So what I'm trying to say is that we read the Bible at a disadvantage just because we're reading it from an English translation. We need lexicographers, that is, experts in words, the ones that usually make up definitions, and specifically those who know Greek and Hebrew. And we also need scholarly commentators to tell us what we can't see in the English translation. Now, a major element that we cannot see, even with their help, except for maybe the scholars, is that we can't see rhetorical structure. And this is very important because both Hebrews and Greeks place a lot of emphasis in structure and their rhetoric. And we lose a lot because we can't see it. It's not native to us. We have our own ways of doing things in English, but they don't match with the way Hebrew and Greek speakers would use them. We don't know the traditional forms of the way they thought and the way they put things, the way they set things up for memorization and such, the various rhetorical devices they used. Now, in our translations, we do have things like chapter and verse, which are not in the Hebrew and Greek texts. We've added them to give us an advantage of being able to go to certain places easily and cite them. Some of our English translations use paragraph markings to let us know at least when paragraphs start and end. Several, like the New King James, usually publish their Bibles with headings to give you an idea of what the subject of the paragraph is. And many of them, especially the more modern translations, show where the text is poetic. So they put it out in verse rather than just straight line prose. But even though they do all these nice things for us, they usually ignore more complex structures and forms, which are hard to show in English. Much easier in Hebrew and probably in Greek as well, because the Hebrews had a way of speaking or arranging things like in acrostics, where they would go through an idea, but each verse or each couplet in a verse would start with the same letter. And so you could see them as you went, that this was A point, B point, C point, or alpha or aleph, bet, dalet, and as you go. So they would show that just by the way they formed the particular thought. Now tonight, we're going to look at a section of Scripture that knowledge of the structure helps to illuminate. That section is Daniel 2 through Daniel 7. So we have 6 chapters there that have a definite structure that help us to understand what Daniel, God, is trying to get across. And its literary arrangement actually drives home a specific, important, vital spiritual reality through all 6 chapters. And I think we'll be able to see that as we go through this. So we consider Daniel a book of prophecy. And it is. Daniel was a prophet, and his writings are prophetic. But the Jews don't place it among the prophets. The Jews actually put it in the writings, like Ruth, Job, Esther, Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Songs, etc. Now, part of this may be because it was written after the fall of Jerusalem. It is a post-exilic book, you might say, written by Daniel in the conservative view, mid to late 6th century BC, probably toward the end of his life. Or maybe he was taking notes the whole time and he was just adding as he went. The guy lived to be 80 plus years old, so he had a lot to say. But, of course, that date is disputed by modern scholars. They'll usually put it in the 4th or 3rd century BC and say somebody else wrote it, but they're all wet. But, or maybe I should say, moreover, the Jews may have put it in the writings rather than in the prophets because half of it is not even written in Hebrew. Half of it is written in Aramaic. You know, it has 12 chapters, and chapter 1, along with chapters 8 through 12, that's 6 chapters, 1 and 8 through 12 are in Hebrew. But chapters 2 through 7, which is the subject of what we're going over tonight, are written in Aramaic. Aramaic was the lingua franca of the Middle East from the days of Babylon, the Babylonian Empire. It was the way they talked to everybody among the various kingdoms that they overthrew and ruled for those years that Babylon was ascendant. So everybody, including the Jews, switched over to Aramaic during that time. And by the time you get to Christ, Hebrew was a scholarly language, not dead, but normally people didn't learn it. They learned Aramaic, and they only got the Hebrew at synagogue or if they went on to some sort of religious training or vocation, they would learn Hebrew. But mostly they spoke Aramaic. Now, this Aramaic section, Daniel 2 through 7, is a puzzle to commentators. Why did the author switch languages? I mean, Daniel was a Hebrew. He was a Jew. He knew Hebrew very well. He actually wrote the other half in Hebrew, so why did he switch over to Aramaic? I don't know. You tell me. There's all sorts of theories, but no one can say this is the real reason why he did that in Aramaic. However, the section's structure that we are going over tonight may provide a clue. The 6 Aramaic chapters, 2 through 7, are all connected by an overall structure. That is, they all have a common theme, and they teach a common spiritual lesson. And you may say, too, that they all use a common base of characters and things that are going on in the various stories are all fairly common to the time when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are helping to run the Babylonian government. So, of course, they would do all their speaking, all their writing, all their correspondence in Aramaic. And so it fits that way that it's just part of the whole milieu of the time. Now, I just mentioned that they all have a common theme and teach a common spiritual lesson. And this is important because what comes out of these 6 chapters is especially helpful to those who are exiled from their homelands, from their native lands. It's really good for people who are living under a foreign government, a government not their own. They're citizens of a different place, but they're living as expatriates, or, as I said, exiles. And so this fits not only the Jews after the destruction of Jerusalem and their captivity in Babylon, but it fits us too, because we're strangers and pilgrims. Our citizenship is in heaven, Paul says. And so we look for a city, we look for our homeland, but we have to live in this world in our physical lives. So it should be very helpful then, and not just helpful, but encouraging, because it fits us so well. Now, let's get into a few technical details here. The rhetorical structure of the 6 Aramaic sections, or the Aramaic section of 6 chapters, is chiastic. Now, David brought this up in a sermon, or I think it was a sermon a year or two ago. You probably remember it, so maybe I should just skip this part. I guess not. Okay. It's chiastic. That is, its 6 chapters form a chiasm, or a chiasmus, as some call it. Let me spell that for you. It's chiasm is C-H-I-A-S-M. C-H-I-A-S-M. Chiastic is C-H-I-A-S-T-I-C. And chiasmus is C-H-I-A-S-M-U-S. A chiasmus, or a chiasm, is a series of inverted parallels. That tells you a lot, right? A series of inverted parallels. Or we could call it a contrast by parallelism in reverse order. Now, you don't have to know that definition. We're not going to have a test at the end. But it's good for you to know that this device is present in the Bible, and it's actually present quite a bit in the Bible. Hebrews loved chiastic verse, and I do believe that they used it a great deal because it was easier to organize and structure something so you could remember it better. You know the theme that is being talked about. Maybe you can get a word picture in your mind, or maybe a letter picture in your mind, because chiasms come from the Greek letter chi, C-H-I, and the letter chi in Greek looks like an X. So it's like this, just like we would write an X if we were writing the name Xavier or xylophone. So thinking about an X like this, one stroke leans forward and the other leans back. And this is the idea of a chiasm, that you have one part that goes forward and then you have another part that comes back toward the beginning. Here's, maybe more of you are auditory learners. This is one way you can think about it. There is a chiastic form in the sentence, do not live to eat, but eat to live. See what I did there? We had the three words, live, to, eat, all going in one direction forward, and then the second half of the sentence turns that around and says, eat to live. So you went forward, and in the same sentence, same structure, and in the last half of it, you brought it back. So the first half is reversed in the second half. Now, scholars usually mark this chiastic structure with letters and their primes. I know I'm getting really into it here, into the details, but it's important to know because if you read the commentaries, they'll often tell you when something is chiastic, or if you look at the outline of the section, they'll actually put it in their commentaries as chiastic, and you can see and learn a lot about, or learn more from the section than you might have learned just reading it straight through. But like I said, the scholars use letters and their primes to mark this out. So there's a letter for each element, and then the reversal is the letter prime. So what you have is in these 6 elements in Daniel 2 through 7 would be denoted by assigning A, B, and C to the first 3 that go forward, and then the reversal would be ABC, that would be the forward ones, and then C prime, B prime, and A prime would be the reversal. Just like don't live to eat, but eat to live. So it'd be ABC, and then C prime, B prime, A prime. Okay, visual learners, this is what I just said. You probably should be able to see this. You have A, which is the first element, B, the second element, C, the third element, and then the structure comes back, C prime, B prime, A prime. Okay? For those of you who like it even simpler, this is what we're studying today. Daniel 2, Daniel 3, Daniel 4, we come back with Daniel 5, 6, and 7. So, what does this mean? Nothing. No, I'm just kidding. This means that the A's are paired, the B's are paired, and the C's are paired. So, what we have is A and A prime are similar. They discuss very much the same thing. B and B prime do as well, but it's slightly different from A, but the two of them are more closely associated than with A or C. And then, of course, C is also different from A and B. So you have these 3 pairs in this order where you go out or forward with 3, and then you come back with 3 on the same themes as the one that they are paired with. So we pair chapter 2 with chapter 7, chapter 3 with chapter 6, and chapter 4 with chapter 5. Now, sometimes in chiasms, the theme leads up to the central pairing and back, but I don't think that's the case in these 6 chapters in Daniel. I think instead that what we have here in terms of God's reasons for structuring it this way, that what he's doing is he's doubling up on these points as a kind of, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, the matter shall be established. That's from Deuteronomy 19:15. So there's an overall theme that he's trying to get across to us, but he's breaking it down into these 3 things, and he's giving us, what would we call it? This is a great proof, and here's another great proof, and a third great proof. And then as we go back, we'll establish that with a second of each of those to pound the point home. This is the truth. All right, let's get into the first pair, Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. So please turn to the book of Daniel. You've probably already done that. And we're going to read a lot of this. I'm going to go into speed reading mode here. And we're going to cover these and help you to see the similarities between the chapters in the pairs and show you the overall themes that God is trying to get across. Okay, I'm going to hop, skip, and jump through these passages, these chapters. Please, I'll try to help you to follow along. Genesis 1. Let's start at the beginning. Now, Daniel 2, verse 1. We'll read through verse 6. Now, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. This is where actually the Aramaic begins, with the word Aramaic. O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. But the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore tell me the dream and its interpretation. So Nebuchadnezzar is being a real hard-nosed here. Whether, as Mark said today, whether he remembered the dream or not, it doesn't matter. When you tell somebody, you better tell me the dream that I had, or I'm going to slit your throat and burn your house down. It's kind of maniacal, don't you think? I mean, even though he had all the power in the world, he kind of went a bit too far on this, I think. What we're seeing from Daniel is Nebuchadnezzar's state of mind here. We're seeing that Nebuchadnezzar had his power go to his head. Okay, let's go on. Verse 24. And we'll go all the way down through 28. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the vision of your head upon your bed were these. And then he tells him what he had seen in the dream. Let's drop down to verse 31. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. We'll keep going. Now he gives its interpretation. This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. After you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king that what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and the interpretation is sure. Okay, we all know Nebuchadnezzar's dream. I went over it in such detail because this begins the environment, let's say, of what we're going to speak about in chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So we know that we're talking about the kingdom of Babylon, the empire of Babylon, ruled over by this king of kings who is a head of gold. And if we understand the various metals to be indication of quality, then Nebuchadnezzar really had a lot going for him. And not that he was perfect. He was, like I said, maniacal. He had all power. He didn't use his power well. He was actually the conqueror of God's people. But God gives an indication here that Nebuchadnezzar was a pretty talented, intelligent man. He was, like the chief of the Gentile kings. He was quite the guy. And so we're dealing with a man who has a lot of potential here. And I'm speaking spiritual potential as well as physical potential. But he had some problems. And sad to say, his chief problem was the same as Hillel. He was full of pride. So we see here that he begins a series of empires that'll stretch across the known world at the time. But each successive empire will be of less quality, but they will become harder. They'll be more forceful. They will be more cruel until you get to the Roman Empire, and they're just iron. They thresh everybody to pieces and crush the other nations around them. But after a while, at a certain point, as you go down the legs of iron, you start them being intermingled with other peoples, and it weakens them. And by the time you get down to the toes, there's a lot of problems with unity. And at that point, God sends the stone that becomes the mountain, and it crushes those earthly kingdoms, scatters them. There's nothing left. The wind comes and blows them away, and he establishes his kingdom on the earth. Now, we could focus on many different parts of this prophecy, but I'm going to confine it to the fact that the vision or the dream provides a long-term overview of world history. The vision provides a long-term overview of world history, culminating in the destruction of human kingdoms and the establishment of God's kingdom. This is a very high-level overview here that we're taking from chapter 2. The viewpoint in chapter 2 is very broad. It encompasses multiple nations of different qualities, and not only is it broad, but it reaches into the far future, especially from Daniel's point of view there in the 6th century BC. This was 2,500 years ago. And so this is showing 2,500 years of history moving forward. But the conclusion is, and this is what the point is that I think Daniel really wanted to get across here, Daniel and God, that no matter the human king or human kingdom down through history, doesn't matter if it's the Third Reich, or it doesn't matter if it's Genghis Khan and his armies, all the Huns, and you just name a king, a kingdom, and its military might. Doesn't matter. God always prevails. His will is always supreme. And no matter how maniacal they are, like Nebuchadnezzar seems to have been, he is under God's control. And God has a plan for history that's going to not only be broad and cover everybody, but it covers all time as well. So this is a very high-level overview of what he's talking about here. All right, let's go to Daniel 7, and we'll see A prime. Start in verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while in his bed, or while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, it was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to us, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and the dominion was given to it. After this I saw, I'm on 7, right? After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots, and there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. I watched till the thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Let's go to 19. Then I wish to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the others. Let's drop down to verse 23. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume it and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly troubled me, and my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. Okay, very similar to what we saw in chapter 2. We had 4 different types of metals that represented nations and empires. Here we have 4 beasts who represent the same nations or empires. But this time, they are all shown to be predatory beasts. Their character is shown. Even though Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold and he's, given a compliment there, it's shown that he is a beast too. He's predatory and he destroys all before him. What we see here is God judging the nations and focusing on the fact that as time moves on, and the fourth beast is the one that is dominant at the end, he destroys the fourth beast and the pompous little horn. He goes into the lake of fire. This pompous little horn is a very important figure at the end time who struts himself about against God, and God smashes him like a bug in the end. Afterward, then, after this is done, God establishes his eternal kingdom and gives it to his saints. I don't believe the saints were mentioned in the first, in chapter 2. No, this second dream, given to Daniel, his servant, deals with the same subject as the first Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but it expands on that dream tremendously. It emphasizes, this one, chapter 7, emphasizes the antagonism of the earthly kingdoms against God, their persecution of the saints. It shows God's judgment based on his law. Did you notice when we came through there, the Ancient of Days set up his court and the books came out? It shows that his law and his record of things is used as a basis for their judgment. And it also shows the quite destructive divine judgment that follows, illustrating the almighty sovereignty of God. That he has everything worked out. He's showing us in advance what's going to happen, and he shows us that he's in charge. He's in control. The bear's going to come up after the lion, the leopard after the bear, this terrible dragon-like, we'll call it, knowing what happens in Revelation. We'll call it a dragon-like beast, comes up out of, it's Rome and Rome's descendants, and God takes care of that one too, even though he is stronger than all the rest and more cruel and more devious. But God wins. God prevails. Even over the worst that man can organize against him. So this Daniel 7 a lot like Daniel 2, is so impressive and so informative and so perspective altering that it troubled Daniel for a long time. I think what it did for Daniel, if I could just give a little personal speculation, I think this changed his mindset. He was probably, until this time, thinking along the lines of God was going to do this through Israel. That God would be using his people like he has in the past. But this dream in Daniel 7, did you even hear him mention Israel? He mentions his saints. We know that they're the Israel of God. But I think it troubled him that the nation of Israel is not seen. Judah is not seen. The only place Judah is really seen is in the person of the Son of Man. But he's not even talked about as the Scion of Judah or a Scion of David. I think what troubled him, along with that, is God's awesome power. He saw this fourth beast and the pompous little horn and probably thought, oh my, this is unbeatable. And like I said, God crushes him like a bug. I think it gave Daniel a vision of God that he hadn't had before. And how huge the scope of what God was doing. Where his focus had been on Israel, Judah, and their sad state at the time. And it really threw him for a loop, because he had been given a lot of new revelation about God's overall plan, and it astounded him. So, what do we learn overall from these two chapters? We gather that God is in control of time and history. And after an extended period of human anti-God misrule, he will rise to act, destroy the enemies, and rule forever. So we should never doubt God's ability to bring his plan to fruition. It's ordained. It's prophesied. The conclusion is already in stone, as it were. So to us, the future is sure. It's guaranteed, and that should bolster our faith that God is doing what he says he will do. So in living in a world in which things are going to pieces, we can be sure that this is all going to pieces because God is allowing it to go to pieces, and he's going to either blow the pieces away and start afresh, or he's going to bring the pieces to a place where he can work with them, if you will. Okay, on to the second pair. Daniel 3 and Daniel 6. Let's go back to Daniel 3. Now, I don't want to read through this extensively like I did the others. I think we all know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were brought before Nebuchadnezzar's golden image, and they were told that they must bow down to it because it represented Nebuchadnezzar, and you must honor the king. Basically, you must commit idolatry before the king, and if you didn't, you were dead. And I do want to note here that in the first seven verses, that the real antagonists here, not just Nebuchadnezzar, but the real antagonists are the Chaldeans. Just file that away. They were considered at this point part of the the ruling class and the intellectuals and the wise men, many of the wise men were Chaldeans. All right, let's pick up, let's see, let's go to 16 through 18. This is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's answer to, are you going to bow down? So the three men answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Let's drop down to verse 22. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Drop down to verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar, this is after the men were brought out. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap. He loved that one. Because there is no other God who can deliver like this. And then he promoted S, M, and A. That's how I have them in my notes. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, we know the story, right? An astounding miracle takes place here. And the maker, the creator of the miracle, shows up. So that Nebuchadnezzar, at least, can see him. That he is the one that's protecting Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so when they come out, Nebuchadnezzar praises God as a God who saves his people. He also turns back his threat upon those who sought to persecute these Jews, making them acknowledge the superiority of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God. Now, let's note some things here. 1, this occurred to 3 Jews who were companions of Daniel. They were fellow exiles of Daniel. We could call them representatives of God's faithful people. Not just God's people, but God's faithful people. They were, we'll just call them the faithless faithful. They're representatives of God's saints who may not necessarily be prophets or whatever. They're faithful people, okay? The crucial point is their faith in God's ability to deliver them and their humble submission to his will. Because remember, they told Nebuchadnezzar, God will save us. But if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down. Okay, 2. The Chaldeans. Remember I told you to keep that in mind. Chaldeans were the Jews' boogeymen. Go and read Habakkuk and read what he says about the Chaldeans that were coming upon Judah and Jerusalem. They were the ones that triggered the persecution against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They are the people, or representatives of the people, who destroyed Jerusalem. They are part of the first beast, the head of gold. They are part of the lion with eagle's wings. They are representatives of human governments, kingdoms, authorities against God's people, who are antagonistic to God's people. Now, God did use them years before to punish his unfaithful people. He brought these mean, despicable, cruel Chaldeans upon Judah and Jerusalem as God's mighty hand against his own. But not even their power, combined with Nebuchadnezzar and his threats, could frustrate God's will toward the faithful. It makes the point that individual faithfulness is more important than being part of a favored people, because God always judges you as an individual. Even though you are a member of a group, God judges you not because you're in the church, in a certain church. God judges you for what you do with what he gives you. Third point, God was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in their trial. He was walking around there in the fiery furnace with them, and he saved them completely. Not even their clothes were smoky. Not even the scent of fire was on them. That's how close God was to them. That's how thoroughly he protected them. And fourth point, God turns this awful trial to salvation and makes a powerful witness that brings him praise and glory. We're supposed to get the idea that if we are faithful like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God will be with us, and no matter what trial we go through, God will be there and he'll protect us according to his will. That if he wants us to make a greater witness or a sacrifice, then that's his call. But we have to be faithful and submissive. But remember, from the chapter 2 and chapter 7, we already know God's overall plan. So being faithful while being persecuted shouldn't bother us overly, because we know how it all turns out. And there are other things. We know about the resurrection. We know about God's rewards and those sorts of things. But because we have been given knowledge that other people don't have, then the persecutions of powerful empires or powerful people don't make as big an impression as it would to somebody who was ignorant. It's still hard. I'm not denying that at all. But I'm saying God has given us the information that we need to take these things faithfully and to be able to overcome our fears and do the job he gives us to do. Okay, chapter 6. This is the prime of the second pair. We all know Daniel in the lion's den. I don't need to go through that. Here, notice that the antagonists to Daniel are the ones who are also governors and satraps, and they envied Daniel for being one of the 3 great governors that Darius had appointed, and that he was favored by Darius, or Darius. Probably Darius, but I'll go with Darius. That's what I learned when I was a kid. Let's see. Let's go to verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since the early days. So he went and continued to worship no matter what the law was that the Persians had made to restrict him on that. Verse 16. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Notice that. This is Darius, the king. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Let's just keep on going. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. The king did. And no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Then the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, kind of like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, not having the smell of smoke on them, because he believed in his God. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Wow. That's pretty savage. Right before dinner, too. Then King Darius wrote, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. All right. Very much like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's trial, Daniel goes through one himself. He's probably an old man at this time, in his 70s or 80s. And this happens to him because he has had such a successful, prosperous life, and he enjoys the favor of the king. And so the rest of the people in the government were envious of him. And God said, that's not going to happen. Now, a major difference here in the two stories is Darius versus Nebuchadnezzar. Did you notice the difference in attitude between them? At the time when Nebuchadnezzar persecuted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he was all in it for himself. It was all about him and worshiping him and his image. Whereas Darius seemed like he had a soft spot in his heart for God. Certainly for Daniel. And he called Daniel's God the living God, meaning that he's active. He's a God that works for his people. And he says, he has faith. He says, I know your God is going to deliver you. And he went so far as to fast for Daniel. Not have any entertainment, not even sleep, because he was so concerned about Daniel that night. But even this relatively good man had no power to save Daniel. What constrained him? Law. the law of the Medes and the Persians. It said that once that he gave a decree, it cannot be rescinded. It had to go through. This kind of links with Mark's sermon today, that even though we don't have a monarchy or an emperor with full power, we are now under a constitution where the power is in the law. And men, wicked men, can use the law against people just as a wicked man who has full power can use his power against the faithful. So whether it's in a state of, or whether we're in a state that has a monarchy, all the power in one person, or whether we're a nation under law, human nature will use the power that it has to try to get rid of God's people. But we find out here that neither powerful men nor powerful law, human law, can stymie God's will. God's will is above theirs. In this section, God was present to deliver Daniel, just as in the other one. And this actually bolstered Darius' faith in God. So Darius, being a king, punished the accusers severely. And this goes with what Jared said today in his sermonette, that they received the judgment that they had given to Daniel. And the whole incident brought a witness and glory to God. Now, the lesson is clear in verses 25 through 27. We won't read them again, but I'll just say that the story of Daniel in the lion's den is an example to all the world that the God who saved Daniel, his servant, is the one true God. That's essentially what Darius proclaimed. A living God, an active God, an interested God, a sovereign over the affairs of men. He looks for ways to save his faithful servants, and he will miraculously intervene in their lives. No matter how powerful the nation may be, his kingdom is the one that will prevail and endure. We keep hearing these same things coming up as we go through them, go through these 6 sections, pounding away that God's in control. God is sovereign. God is active. God will do what he sets out to do. Back to Daniel 4. This is the story of Nebuchadnezzar's insanity, his dream about these things happening and seeing how great he is, and he's the great tree, but he gets cut down, and it's shown that he will live through that. Let's just read Daniel's explanation starting in verse 19. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonished for a time, and his thoughts troubled him. So the king spoke and said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its interpretation trouble you. He was thinking, I've got to tell Nebi here that he's going to go through 7 years of living like an animal. Belteshazzar answered and said, My lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies. The tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, whose height reached to the heavens, and which could be seen by all the earth, whose leaves were lovely and its fruit abundant, in which was food for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and on whose branches the birds of the heaven had their habitation. It is you, O king, who have grown and become strong, for your greatness has grown and reaches to the heavens, and your dominion to the end of the earth. And inasmuch as the king saw a watcher, a holy one, an angel coming down from heaven and saying, Chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts of the field till 7 times 7 years pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king. They shall drive you from men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make you eat grass like oxen. They shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomever he chooses. And inasmuch as they gave the command to leave the stump and roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be assured to you after you come to know that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by being righteous, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity. So this happens. Ultimately, let's go to verse 34. And at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my honor and splendor returned to me. My counselors and nobles resorted to me. I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth, and his ways justice, and those who walk in pride he is able to abase. So the same tyrant that we saw in those other chapters, in chapters 2 and 3, is given a dream where it is designed to teach Nebuchadnezzar and us an important lesson. And that is what is repeated 3 times in this chapter. The Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. He also says here, he's also told in verse 26 that heaven rules. It's basically the same thing. So what we learn from this chapter is politicized leadership is out of our hands. It's out of any man's hands. We find out in Romans, the 13th chapter, that all authority is established by God. So he chooses leaders for his purposes, and he'll also take them out for his purposes. It's all under his control. And the last 4 verses from Nebuchadnezzar expand this idea, because that's the lesson that Nebuchadnezzar had to learn. Even though he was great and mighty, he was this great tree that fed the whole earth and everybody lived under his shade, he had to learn that he had a master. And it took 7 years of living like a beast to finally get it through his thick skull. He had to be abased as the lowest of beasts before his pride was pricked enough that God was satisfied and returned him to his humanity. And then he says here, and this is significant, after he says that God's in total control, he also says that the kingdom or the King of heaven is true and right. He's the source of truth. He's the source of moral behavior, godly behavior. And he's also just. Everything he does is absolutely right and good, even if it's destructive. And his sovereign power then is used to those ends, meaning to magnify the truth and to bring justice. Finally, we learn here that God hates pride. It's one of the things he hates most. He hates pride in all of its forms and all of its effects because it destroys everything. He will put the proud down if they don't humble themselves. And again, we get a repeat that his kingdom will prevail and endure forever. Now, Daniel 5. We go through this every feast. I talk about Belshazzar's feast and the handwriting on the wall. That's what we're talking about here. We'll start in verse 11. Now, we'll skip verse 11. We'll go all the way down to verse 13 because they're just saying there that there's Daniel who'll be able to interpret this. Then Daniel was brought in before the king, verse 13, and the king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel?" Blah, blah, blah. "I have heard of you, that the Spirit of God is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not give the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of you, that you can give interpretations and explain enigmas. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck and shall be the third ruler of the kingdom." And Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory, and honor. And because of all the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him." Sound like chapter 4? "Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. And whoever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. And they fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew or understood that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men, and appoints over it whomever he chooses, God. But you, his son, or grandson, actually, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. And you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know, and the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written." This is the inscription that was written. "Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin." This is the interpretation of each word. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peresh, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with the stuff he didn't want. And that very night, verse 30, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom. Okay, this chapter clearly has the same theme as the one before. But the difference is Nebuchadnezzar repented. He finally came to see the light, and he acknowledged God. Belshazzar, though, he went deeper into his pride. He called for the temple vessels. They praised idols. They reveled and didn't give God any acknowledgement at all. So we see the flip side here of what happens to those who will not yield to God. So Belshazzar's pride and idolatry and sacrilege was judged, and God removed him from the scene. So we get two judgments against pride with opposing results. Nebuchadnezzar eventually repented and lived, acknowledging and praising God. Belshazzar would not glorify God, although he knew what had happened to his grandfather. He knew the story. And the judgment was swift, and he met his end that very night. Here God explains how he works, not just with powerful kings, but with every person. Note that the kings, both kings, were unconverted Gentiles, but he still judged them. They stand as representatives of all people. Everybody, all humans. One changes and gets glory and honor and receives his kingdom. The other does not repent. He thumbs his nose at God and he gets slain. Everything is taken away from him. In a sense, we can say that the theme of this pair of chapters is what we find in Revelation 20, verses 11 through 13. I'll quickly read that, like I've been quickly reading everything tonight. Starting in verse 11, "Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, whose face the earth and heaven, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged according to their works." That's the big point that I wanted to get across, by the things which were written in the books. So their works were compared with what was written in the books, and everybody is found wanting one way or the other, but those who will repent will live, and those who will not will die. It repeats in verse 13, "And they were judged, each one according to his works." Okay, conclusion. I know you're hungry. Let's see what the chiastic chapters tell us as a whole. One, I've got 3 points here. We'll go through them very quickly. God is in absolute control of time and history. That's the first point. God is in absolute control of time and history, and he will intervene in world affairs to punish his adversaries and establish his kingdom and reward those who are faithful. 2, has to do with that last word. God is active among his faithful people, and he has power to deliver them even from the worst of trials and situations and persecutions according to his will. 3, God is judge of all, even the unconverted and the great among men. He hates pride and idolatry, and if he must humble a person to repent, he'll do it. But he will punish those who do not repent of their wicked works. So we don't have to worry about taking vengeance or anything like that. We can let them be them and do what they will, but they are not stronger than God. And if they do something against you, they will get their due. You can bet on it. So overall, we learn that God is sovereign. He is observant and active. He has a plan that he is working out. And we've been called to it, to that plan, to participate in it. It's a plan of redemption and a grand purpose to establish God's kingdom over all humanity. And we need not doubt that our God has the power to bring his purposes to fruition. So we, as servants of the living God, can carry out our divine responsibilities with confidence and faithfulness, even when the earth shakes under our feet. Enjoy your evening. Get something to eat.